Hey, good morning, class. I hope this finds everybody doing well. This is the chapter 27 SUPA lecture part 1. It corresponds with the PowerPoint. Um, the PowerPoint is 13 slides, and that does include the title slide. Um, so for today, for this first part of it, we are going to go through slides 1 through 6, which is essentially slides 2 through 6. But let's start with the title slide. America at mid-century. So thinking about that, you're talking about the post-World War II era, the 1950s into the early 1960s. Kind of early Cold War time period of huge economic prosperity. You know changing culture and how we live with growth of things like the suburbs, the advent of television, and so on and so forth. So I want to start, and let's jump into slide 2, which is titled Elvis in rock and roll. Sorry, my cat almost jumped into the lecture there. When we talk about Elvis, Elvis did mix a variety of different genres into his music. It was, accepted in mass by teenagers. The 1950s was a time of, the jukeboxes, the, kids driving cars, and it's symbolic of, the power of youth culture. And I mean, let's dive into that. Rebellious youth. I can only imagine that if I was teaching this class and I were to ask you, can someone, raise your hand if your parents have said to you, I can't believe that you listen to that music, and the language in that music, or I can't believe they talk about that. Well, guess what? Parents were kind of questioning kids in the 50s over Elvis. And if we think about it, it's really just continuing of modern America. Even then you throw things in like sex appeal into music, and I mean think where we've gone today. With what is considered socially acceptable in music for youth, and what is consumed by your peers. So Elvis is really the beginning of that. He was a pop star. I mean, take who are your pop stars today. I'm not going to even take any guesses because I'm going to probably be wrong, and you would laugh at me if I was in class. But let's move on to slide 3, which gets into Levittown, New York. Levittown and Long Island, developed by the Levitt brothers, was basically like the assembly line mass production of homes. They used mass production assembly line techniques to home building, and they opened up this world of identical little houses that were built quickly, and it created a huge housing boom. One thing you do need to understand is that suburban America, the suburbs it was for white America. Banks used techniques like redlining, and they would not cut mortgages to people of color. Tenants were not allowed to, or owners were not allowed to rent out to tenants that were minorities. And the suburbs was that was an element of white America. It was not for people of color. The expression that historians use when they describe the suburbs, which really boomed with the growth of the interstates, because the interstates connect the cities and the suburbs developed along those interstates outside the cities, was the suburbs created white flight, where white Americans fled to the suburbs and the cities were left black, brown, and broke. That's the expression that you'll hear sociologists and historians often use sometimes when they describe the impact of suburbanization. And Levittown is the example of that. And there were other Levittowns all across the country outside major cities. Moving on to number 4, TV and the suburban woman. Men returned home after World War II. They essentially went back to being breadwinners in the traditional family unit. You had the baby boom, and many women were reconfined to the home. The suburban housewife, right? Today you hear the terms the soccer mom, right? and the way a woman's life was kind of depicted in many of the TV shows, because the TV was the medium of this generation, is that really, the only path for fulfillment and happiness for a woman was, suburban domesticity, housework, childcare. Um, and Betty Friedan, when she writes The Feminine Mystique, she really launches this modern feminist movement, and she challenges that, and she's really looking at it as a life of conformity. Um, Not to say that women did not work during this time period, but the suburban housewife, was really portrayed as someone who would receive, gratification and fulfillment from, taking care of children. And the TV was the medium where that gets expressed. And I mean, if you look at television today, sometimes it tells people how to behave, and it tells people how they should act. It makes people think what is cool and what is not cool. Why? Because they see it on TV. In the 1950s were no different. Or maybe in this case not on TV, maybe it's on streaming, but it's essentially the same idea. I'm going to move on to number 5, health and medicine, medical advancements, surgeries, drugs, vaccinations, really allowed people to start living a lot longer. And it's those baby boomers, that were really born during this time period, which they're living a lot longer. And we look at the baby boom generation, and we look at really, the impact that they've had on the economy. When they first came up, you needed more birthing units in hospitals, and I probably said this in the last lecture, and then you needed more schools, and then ultimately you need more jobs, and so on and so forth as we move down the line. Well, today, a lot of these baby boomers are still living, and they're collecting Social Security, which is a very expensive, program that the federal government runs. Social Security is a tax you pay when you're employed. Then when you turn 62 and a half, by today's standards, you're eligible to collect Social Security, and that's the government giving you a check, because you're no longer at quote-unquote working age. So, not to say that people over 62 and a half can't work. But, when we think about that, it's because these advancements in health and medicine, which came about mid-century, which have allowed the baby boomers to live much longer. Which, what is interesting, if you take, my generation, I was born in 1977. I'm considered what's like Generation X. There are more baby boomers alive than Gen Xers like myself. And then the group below me, the millennials, there's more millennials alive than Gen Xers. So like my age group is kind of unique, because there's less of us than the group above us and the group below us. I'm going to move on to the last slide, which is slide 6, organized labor. It's no surprise that we had our quote-unquote economic golden age in the post-World War II period, and that also coincides with the amount of labor unions we had in this country. It would really be in the 1950s where labor unions reached their high point, and as a result, it helped really create a middle-class life for millions and millions of Americans. What has happened with the labor movement in this country is it has declined since the 1950s, and one could also point to the decline of the middle class in America. Do the two go hand in hand? One could easily make that argument. When you look at companies, especially in industry and manufacturing, why pay the American worker, I don't know, $15, $20, $25 an hour in health insurance when you can pay a worker in Asia or in Central America a fraction of that? So many companies have shipped their jobs overseas because, they don't want to pay American workers a living wage, and that's essentially what a labor union fights for, right? Higher wages, and benefits in today's day and age, less hours, and better conditions. So you can see the numbers here on slide 6. All right, the AFL-CIO, which is still around, in 1955 they had 12.5 million people. That's a pretty big block, and especially unions can also influence government, because if they vote as a block, they get respected politically. I hope this was informative. Tomorrow you'll get to watch part 2. If you guys have any questions, please send me an email. I really miss you guys, and I wish we could do this in person, but that's obviously not going to happen this year because of the school closure. I hope you're all doing well and you're healthy. If you need anything, please get in touch. Take care.